I stepped into the ICU like I always do. Silent, precise, the weight of the world pressing against my chest, but never showing. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. The antiseptic tang mixing with the hum of monitors and the soft beeping of life support machines. My hands, steady and sure, adjusted the IV drip on a patient as I scanned the notes in her chart. Outside this hospital, I was Anne Clark, a 41-year-old surgeon with a reputation for calm under pressure, for relentless dedication. But inside my family, I was something else entirely, a secret keeper, a fixer, the invisible force holding everything together while everyone else looked away. For years, I was the one who bailed out my siblings from financial ruin, smoothed over my stepmother Allison's manipulations, and bore the emotional weight no one wanted to carry. And yet, no one saw me. Not really. No one thanked me. Not aloud. The Thanksgiving holiday was looming, and with it, that inevitable knot of tension tightened in my gut. I dreaded the yearly family gathering more each time. Allison would be there, her smile polite but cold, her eyes sharp with something I could never quite name. She was the stepmother who ruled our fractured family with an iron fist wrapped in silk, always watching, always judging. I knew she thought of me as a threat, the capable daughter who had somehow slipped through her control. I had learned to keep my head down, to bite back the words that wanted to spill out, but this year felt different. Maybe it was the exhaustion that seeped into my bones, or the small spark of defiance that flickered quietly inside me. I carried one secret with me into that sterile ICU room, something Allison would never guess. Last year, after a suspicious incident nearly jeopardized a patient's life, I had installed a hidden surveillance camera in a discreet corner. It wasn't just about protecting my career. It was about shielding myself from the unseen battles Allison waged behind closed doors. The line between family and foe blurred constantly, and I felt the weight of that more acutely than ever. As I glanced at the screen, the grainy feed flickering in the corner, I felt a strange steadiness settle over me. Maybe this holiday would change everything. Maybe I could finally reclaim the story no one told. Yet exhaustion lingered, like a shadow just beyond my reach. I whispered to myself, steady and quiet. For years, I was the one who kept this family, and my career, afloat, but they never saw me. And the truth was, maybe I was done being invisible. I remember the first time I truly felt like I was on the outside, looking in at a family that wasn't mine. I was 15, standing in the shadow of my father's new wife, Allison, as she swept into our lives like a storm. From the very beginning, it was clear I didn't belong. I watched her wrap herself around my younger siblings like they were her golden treasures, lavishing them with gifts and praise, while I was handed chores in silence. I remember the sting of being the invisible daughter, the one who disappeared whenever Allison wanted the spotlight for Rachel or Mark. One Christmas morning sticks out. Rachel unwrapping a delicate gold necklace, her eyes shining with delight, while I sat quietly with a pair of plain gloves Allison had tossed my way. It was as if my achievements, my hard work, my dreams, didn't exist. When Allison canceled my college fund to pay for Rachel's art school tuition, I swallowed the disappointment, telling myself it was fair. I thought maybe if I worked harder, stayed quieter, I'd earn her love, but it never came. Family holidays were battlegrounds where Allison made sure Rachel was the shining star, parading her successes while I became the forgotten shadow. I tried to convince myself it was my fault, that I wasn't enough, that I just needed to try harder. But deep down, I knew the truth was something darker. Allison's favoritism wasn't love. It was a weapon designed to isolate me, to keep me small and out of sight. I became the scapegoat, the one everyone could blame, while Allison held the reins. Those years of emotional exile shaped me, teaching me to carry burdens alone, to suffer quietly. But they also planted something else, a seed of defiance, buried deep beneath the surface, waiting to grow. Over the past decade, I've given so much to my family it would make most people's heads spin. I've lent over $75,000, quietly, without expectation or praise. When Mark spiraled into gambling debts, I covered the bills. I funded Rachel's extravagant wedding without a word. Allison, too, had her emergencies, calls landing at all hours, and I never hesitated to help. I skipped vacations, professional development courses, even moments with my own husband, David, because the family needed me. And David, pragmatic and calm, stood beside me, managing the finances behind the scenes, reminding me that my sacrifices mattered, even if no one else acknowledged them. I discovered a hidden strength in all this, a secret power rooted in my meticulous nature. I kept detailed records of every dollar lent, every favor extended, every crisis averted. Allison thought she controlled the narrative, but I held the true ledger. I could track debts, demands, and manipulations in a way no one else could. Yet, despite all this, Allison publicly dismissed me as selfish or ungrateful. At the last family meeting, she lauded Rachel's generosity while ignoring everything I had done. I felt the heat of frustration rise, but I swallowed it down. I knew silence was my armor, and beneath the surface, I held the power Allison didn't suspect. The first real humiliation in front of the family hit like a punch to the gut. It was a sunny Sunday brunch at Allison's house, her territory, her stage. The room smelled of cinnamon and roasted turkey, laughter mingling with the clink of glasses. Then Allison's voice sliced through the warmth. "Anne's been so distracted lately. I worry her hospital duties are slipping. Patient outcomes aren't what they used to be." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Mark shifted uncomfortably. Rachel's smile faltered. I felt my cheeks flush, a burning mix of shame and fury. Allison's accusation wasn't just unfair. It was a calculated attack on both my professional reputation and my place in the family. Inside, my mind screamed, how could she say this with everyone watching? Yet I forced myself to stay calm, to meet her gaze evenly. "I won't accept lies about my work," I said quietly but firmly. The room grew tense, the silence thick with unsaid truths. I was hurt, yes, but more than that, I was furious. Still, a part of me tried to rationalize Allison's cruelty as insecurity, perhaps jealousy masked as concern. But the cracks were beginning to show, and I realized this was only the start of something far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. Allison's counterattack came swift and silent, like a cold draft seeping through the cracks of a door I'd thought was firmly shut. The day after I dared to push back at that brunch, the whispers began. Soft, poisonous murmurs that slithered through family gatherings and even slipped into my hospital corridors. "Anne's withholding money again," someone said, voice low, eyes darting away. "She's playing the martyr, always the victim." The words were so carefully chosen, so well rehearsed. I realized they weren't spontaneous. They were planted. Allison's flying monkeys, her distant cousins, her close friends, even a few neighbors, carried her message like a dark cloud, isolating me from the family's fragile support network. I caught Mark one afternoon, his eyes avoiding mine as he muttered about family alliances and how I just didn't understand. The brother I once trusted now seemed distant, a barrier I couldn't cross. Rachel, too, seemed caught in Allison's web, her once bright eyes clouded with confusion and hesitant loyalty. Worse, Allison rewrote history with the finesse of a master storyteller. She twisted our past conversations, planting seeds of doubt in my own mind. "You never mentioned that," she'd say with faux surprise, or, "That's not how I remember it." I found myself second-guessing my memories, like the ground beneath me was shifting too fast to trust. When I tried to present facts, my detailed ledger of financial support, my hospital evaluations, Allison met me with a well-practiced charm that made me hesitate. "Anne's always been so sensitive," she'd say sweetly, eyes wide with mock innocence. I'd never want to cause her pain, but beneath the surface, I saw the predator's glint, the cold calculation in her smile. She whispered to David in passing, suggesting that my family issues might soon spill into his business, quietly sowing seeds of doubt in his mind. The walls were closing in, but instead of fear, a steely resolve took root inside me. I began keeping even more meticulous records, not just numbers but conversations, dates, behaviors. Allison was playing a dangerous game and I intended to keep score. I thought if I could just get everyone on the same page, maybe, just maybe, I could stop this before it spiraled further. So I arranged a family meeting, hoping to lay everything out in the open, a peace offering, a chance to clear the air. I gathered the financial statements I'd labored over, printed out hospital evaluations that disproved Allison's claims about my performance, and invited our elderly uncle to mediate. Sitting around the polished oak table, I felt the weight of years pressing down. My voice was steady as I spoke, my words precise. I've sacrificed more than you know. These statements show every dollar lent, every crisis averted. I'm not the villain here. But Allison's reaction was what I expected, yet dreaded. Her eyes widened with exaggerated shock, then narrowed into something colder. "Anne's always been about self-promotion," she said, voice dripping with false hurt. "She's trying to sabotage the family to make herself look like a martyr." The mediator, vulnerable to Allison's emotional theatrics, struggled to stay impartial. Rachel's eyes filled with tears, torn between sisterly love and the stories Allison spun. Mark sat silent, his allegiance shifting. The family fractured further before my eyes. Allison's parting words stung the most. Anne's disconnected from what this family truly values. I left that room hollow, my hope for peace extinguished, feeling more isolated than ever. The emotional labor I had invested felt wasted, and Allison's grip only tightened. Then came the blow I never saw coming, one that cut deeper than words. At a hospital board meeting, whispers turned into accusations. Allison had leaked false information, claiming I was involved in malpractice during a recent ICU procedure. The room felt like it was closing around me as the medical board announced a suspension of my privileges pending investigation. The news spread like wildfire, a wildfire stoked by Allison's calculated cruelty. Faces in the hospital shifted from respect to suspicion. Colleagues who once nodded in solidarity now glanced away, unsure whom to believe. Mark refused to defend me publicly, while Rachel avoided my calls altogether. My career, built on years of sacrifice and precision, was suddenly under siege. I felt the sting of betrayal like a physical wound, raw and unrelenting. The humiliation wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. Allison sat back, watching quietly, her cold smile barely concealed as my world crumbled piece by piece. The whispers that once haunted family gatherings now echoed through hospital hallways. I was exposed, vulnerable, and utterly alone. This attack was no accident. It was a calculated strike meant to break me. And for the first time, I felt the weight of that truth settle heavily on my shoulders, pushing me toward a breaking point I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge. Desperation drove me to confront Allison one last time. In the quiet of her living room, away from prying eyes, I found a steadiness I didn't know I had. My voice was calm but fierce as I said, "Enough. I've given everything to this family and to you. Now you're trying to destroy me. If you want peace, stop this." I offered a hand, a chance to work through the chaos, to protect what little family we had left, and to shield my career from ruin. But Allison's smile was icy, unyielding. "You're mistaken if you think I'll let you walk away unscathed," she said, voice low and sharp. Her words cut deeper than any accusation. When she threatened to escalate the malpractice allegations publicly, the line was crossed. I realized then that reconciliation was impossible. Allison's need for control outweighed any hope for peace. The fragile threads that once held my family together snapped, and with them, my hope for a quiet resolution died. But beneath the despair, a new resolve was born, a determination to fight back, to reclaim my dignity and my life, no matter the cost. The hospital board meeting was a nightmare that replayed itself in my mind over and over, like a wound refusing to heal. I had believed that the truth, the meticulous records, the glowing evaluations, even the hidden ICU footage, would clear my name. Instead, Allison's poisonous whispers had already spread through the corridors, twisting perceptions against me. The board's investigation stalled on technicalities and hearsay. Allison's influence reached farther than I imagined. She'd spun a web so tangled, even my closest colleagues hesitated to stand by me. The room was cold and clinical, but the judgment felt personal, a knife twisting inside me. At home, the silence was deafening. David tried to shield me from the worst of it, but even he was strained. His own work was under subtle threat. His business partners received veiled warnings about their association with me, a risk to professional reputation, whispered behind closed doors. I saw the tension in his eyes, the silent question hanging between us. How long could this go on before everything unraveled? I wanted to scream at Allison, to demand she stop, but the family had turned into a hostile minefield. Mark's once warm greetings had become curt nods. Rachel's calls went unanswered. Even some of my oldest friends, swayed by Allison's narrative, avoided me. I was isolated, cast as the villain in a story I hadn't written. I sat alone in the dark, the house too quiet except for the hum of the central heating. The weight of betrayal pressed down on me harder than exhaustion ever had. Doubt crept in like a cold fog. Had I really been so blind? Was I the problem all along? The memories of those Christmases, the stolen opportunities, the whispered accusations, they all collided in a storm of shame and confusion. My hands shook as I stared at the phone. No messages from family, no calls from work. The loneliness was suffocating. Somewhere beneath the despair, though, a small spark flickered. I thought of the hidden camera in the ICU, my silent witness to the truth, the years of covert preparation, the careful ledger of favors and loans, the patience I'd held onto despite everything. This wasn't the end. It couldn't be. The next family gathering was Thanksgiving, and the tension was unbearable. I arrived with a pit in my stomach, the familiar scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon mingling with the cold undercurrents Allison always brought. The dining room glittered with false warmth, but Allison's eyes were sharp, predatory. Before I could even take my seat, she stood and announced, loud enough for the entire family to hear, "I've reported Anne for malpractice. The family deserves better. Someone who puts us first, not herself." The room stiffened, the chatter dying to a murmur. My father sat quietly, his frailty making his silence feel like a condemnation. I felt my heart pound painfully against my ribs, the walls closing in. Then my phone vibrated. A message from a nurse I barely knew, marked urgent. Hands trembling, I opened it to find a video clip. Grainy, shaky footage from the ICU camera. There was Allison, whispering sharply to a nurse, insisting that patient records be altered. The camera caught her hands hovering over charts, her voice cold as she coerced the nurse into changing data that had been used to falsely accuse me. The room seemed to hold its breath as I stood slowly, voice steady but icy. "You wanted to ruin me? Watch this." I tapped the screen, and the video played on the tablet, projected onto the wall for everyone to see. Faces blanched. Allison's mask cracked, revealing panic and fury. The victim was no longer invisible. She was rising, fierce and unyielding. After the stunned silence broke, I retreated to my room, the adrenaline fading and a tidal wave of emotions crashing down. Alone, I replayed the years in my mind. The sacrifices swallowed whole, the silent insults, the orchestrated isolation. The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface now roared, scorching away the shame that had once held me prisoner. I realized how deeply Allison's favoritism had poisoned the family, turning siblings into pawns and love into manipulation. I had been the scapegoat for too long, the invisible one who bore the brunt of cruelty without protest. But now, pain had sharpened into clarity. I whispered to the empty room, I was invisible for too long. No more. I deserve respect, truth, and peace. This wasn't just about vindication. It was an awakening, a declaration that I would no longer suffer in silence. The next morning, with exhaustion still clinging to my bones, I sat across from David at the kitchen table, the soft morning light filtering through the blinds. I unfolded my plan slowly, carefully. "We expose Allison's lies," I said, voice low. "But it has to be smart, gradual, undeniable. We can't just roar. We have to dismantle her control piece by piece." David nodded, his support steady as always. He promised to handle the financial and legal front, taking the weight off my shoulders so I could focus on the family dynamics. We talked strategy, how to plant seeds of doubt, how to protect my reputation while letting truth seep through cracks in Allison's carefully constructed facade. I started with Mark. cautiously opening conversations, hinting at the manipulation he hadn't seen or refused to acknowledge. Rachel was more fragile, her loyalty tangled with her own confusion. But I spoke gently, planting questions where Allison's stories had been absolute. David reminded me to be patient. This was a long game, not a quick victory. My posture changed subtly. I was no longer the defensive daughter shrinking into shadows. I was a strategist, a quiet force gathering strength and allies. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope, a flicker of power. It was time to reclaim my life, my family, and my dignity, on my terms. I sat at the edge of my living room sofa with a thick legal pad on my lap, scribbling details and cross-referencing notes from countless conversations, bank statements, and overheard snippets. Allison's dependencies weren't as hidden as she thought. Mark and Rachel funneled small sums into her accounts, loans disguised as gifts, while she relied heavily on their loyalty to mask her misdeeds. Her manipulations were less subtle than her polished exterior suggested, and every favor owed to her was a thread I could tug. I traced payments marked vaguely for emergencies or family expenses, each one a silent confession of her financial fragility. The more I dug, the clearer it became. Allison's empire was built on shaky foundations, propped up by family members too afraid or too blinded by favoritism to see the cracks beneath. There were glaring inconsistencies in her stories, like the time she claimed she'd paid off a loan herself, yet the bank records showed no such payment. Her explanations twisted like smoke, always shifting just enough to evade direct confrontation. Consulting my trusted lawyer confirmed my suspicions. There were legal vulnerabilities in how Allison managed joint assets. Fraud, coercion, and misappropriation weren't just possibilities. They were documented risks. The lawyer's calm voice cut through the swirl of emotions as she outlined potential exposure points. "This is a house of cards," she said quietly. "If you play this right, you can bring it all down." The realization surged through me. Allison's confidence was a mask, and beneath it lay blind spots I could exploit. Beyond finances, Allison's social standing was surprisingly fragile. Whispers of her manipulations had circulated in the community, buried beneath layers of charm and false smiles. Her carefully cultivated image depended on silence and control. Remove those, and the facade could crumble. I cataloged every instance where Allison's behavior had alienated neighbors or friends, every rumor I'd heard but never dared voice aloud. She depended too much on a network built on fear and obligation, not genuine affection. This was where my power truly lay, not just in evidence or confrontation, but in turning Allison's own network against her, planting seeds of doubt that could grow into fractures. As I closed the notebook, exhaustion settled deep in my chest, but beneath it was a burgeoning clarity. I was no longer navigating blindly. I had mapped Allison's dependencies, her debts, her vulnerabilities, the skeletons she tried so hard to hide. It was a delicate web, one I would dismantle thread by thread. The family gatherings, the whispered conversations, the quiet financial lifelines she relied on, they were all pieces of the puzzle. And now, I held the final image in my hands. With this map etched firmly in my mind, I knew my next steps had to be precise. Allison thrived on chaos and manipulation, but I would build my approach on careful, silent strategy. I was no longer the overlooked scapegoat. I was becoming the architect of Allison's unraveling. The thought both terrified and exhilarated me. I whispered to myself, "This is where control begins." I moved through the next days with quiet purpose, my actions deliberate but invisible. In the sanctuary of my office, I secured backups of every document: financial statements, bank records, hospital personnel files, even the ICU footage I had kept hidden for months. Each file was encrypted and stored in multiple secure locations, a digital fortress against Allison's reach. Passwords were changed, security measures strengthened, and my legal team was updated on every new development. I wasn't just preparing evidence, I was building an unbreakable fortress around the truth. At family events, I wore a calm mask that belied the storm inside. I engaged in polite conversation, careful to avoid direct conflict while slipping subtle reminders of Allison's duplicity into casual remarks. At Thanksgiving, I commented lightly on the importance of honesty, my tone measured but pointed enough to leave an impression. When Mark brushed off my hints, I let it slide with a smile, knowing the seeds I planted would take root slowly. With Rachel, I was gentler, weaving doubt into stories and asking questions that made her hesitate. "Do you really think Mom would do that?" I'd ask softly, watching her eyes flicker with uncertainty. These were small moves, but necessary. Preparing for the hospital board testimony was another layer of the plan. I rehearsed my statements repeatedly, ensuring every word was precise and grounded in fact. The board needed no room for doubt, no space for Allison's manipulations to take hold. I imagined myself standing firm under the harshest scrutiny, unshaken by whispered lies. The ICU footage was my secret weapon, but it had to be deployed with care. I couldn't afford to appear desperate or vindictive. The truth had to speak for itself. David was my anchor through it all. Over late-night conversations, we refined the strategy, balancing patience with urgency. He reminded me to breathe, to keep my focus sharp. "You're not just fighting, Allison," he said quietly. "You're reclaiming your life." His steady presence was a balm to my frayed nerves. I realized that in maintaining this facade, this calm, composed Anne, I was building a new armor. The storm was coming. But for now, the silence was mine to control. Each day ended with a quiet review of progress, a mental checklist of small victories and adjustments. The world outside might still see me as the victim, but beneath the surface, I was preparing to strike. The calm before the storm wasn't weakness. It was the poised breath before a powerful release. One afternoon, as I met quietly with Rachel at a coffee shop, I noticed a woman sitting at the next table watching me intently. After a few moments, she approached with hesitant steps and a nervous smile. "Anne, I'm Linda Harper," she said softly. "I don't know if you remember, but I'm Allison's stepdaughter from her previous marriage." Her eyes were weary, heavy with unspoken pain. I nodded, heart pounding. This was unexpected. Linda's story spilled out in hushed tones between sips of bitter coffee. Years of emotional abuse, financial exploitation, and deliberate sabotage echoed my own experiences. "She's done this before," Linda said, her voice cracking. "I'm not the first, and I'm ready to stand with you." The weight of her words hit me like a physical blow. Allison's pattern was no isolated cruelty. It was a cycle she repeated, a web of control spun across families. The realization was chilling and invigorating at once. Linda's presence shifted everything. She held documents and photos I'd never seen, evidence of Allison's manipulations in her earlier family. As we compared notes, I felt a fierce surge of solidarity. This wasn't just my battle anymore. It was a reckoning for Allison's entire legacy of betrayal. Linda's alliance was unexpected, but powerful. A new force to dismantle Allison's carefully constructed world. The stakes escalated in that quiet cafe. Allison's reach extended beyond my family, and exposing her meant confronting a history of pain she worked hard to conceal. I felt the tension coil inside me, a mix of fear and determination. This was no longer just about reclaiming respect or truth. It was about breaking a pattern that had destroyed lives. When Linda left, promising to be my ally, I sat back, the weight of the discovery settling deep in my bones. The puzzle was bigger than I imagined, but so was the chance to stop Allison once and for all. A new chapter had opened, and I was ready to write it. The first strikes were subtle, but deliberate. I began by withdrawing the financial support Allison had come to depend on. Small transfers stopped. Emergency loans quietly declined. The shift was almost imperceptible, but Allison noticed. Her calls became sharper, her tone less sure. I blocked her access to joint family accounts, a move that sent ripples through the household. In parallel, I alerted the family attorneys to suspected fraud, providing them with copies of documents I had meticulously gathered. At the hospital, I anonymously sent the ICU footage and related evidence to trusted board members and colleagues. The video was damning. Allison's coercion caught in cold clarity. The ripple effect was immediate, but muted. Whispers of doubt began to swirl around the corridors, though no one could yet name the source. Allison, sensing change but blind to its origin, grew defensive and erratic, her control slipping through her fingers like sand. I reached out quietly to Mark and Rachel, planting carefully worded doubts about Allison's past manipulations and ongoing lies. To Mark, I spoke with measured frustration. You trust her too much. You don't see what's happening beneath the surface. With Rachel, I was gentler, but no less firm. I know it's hard to believe, but you deserve the truth. Their reactions were mixed. Confusion, hesitation, and the faintest flicker of realization. The family dynamic was shifting, fragile but unmistakable. Watching from the sidelines, I felt the first cracks appearing in Allison's defenses. Her allies hesitated, unsure how to respond to the growing unease. She was isolated, but not yet defeated. The game was underway, and I was patient, waiting for the perfect moment to press harder. The balance of power was shifting beneath the surface, and Allison's carefully maintained facade was beginning to fracture. As the days passed, I remained calm, keeping my moves discreet and my face composed. The consequences of my actions rippled quietly but powerfully, and Allison was left grasping at shadows. I was no longer the invisible victim. I was the force unraveling the carefully spun web of control she had built over years. And this was only the beginning. The air in the living room was thick with a tension so palpable it almost hurt to breathe. The family had gathered as expected. Mark looked uneasy. Rachel clung nervously to David's arm, and Linda sat quietly, her presence a silent testament to the storm about to break. Allison arrived last, her usual confident smile faltering slightly when she saw the determined look on my face. I had rehearsed this moment over and over, but nothing could calm the rapid beat of my heart. Yet, I stood tall, steady, refusing to let her see my fear. "I've called this meeting because there's something that needs to be said," I began, voice clear and unwavering. "For years, I've kept silent about the ways Allison has manipulated not just me, but this entire family." I held up a folder, thick with documents, financial records, bank statements, the ICU footage on a tablet, all backed by Linda's testimony. The room fell silent as I laid out the evidence with painstaking clarity, piece by piece unraveling Allison's carefully constructed lies. Mark's face drained of color. Rachel's eyes widened in disbelief. Allison's expression flickered from shock to rage, then something close to desperation. "This," I said firmly, voice rising just enough to command attention, "is proof of stolen money, emotional blackmail, and sabotage. I was the scapegoat, the invisible one who bore the brunt of her cruelty, but I refuse to be a victim any longer." The murmurs around the room grew louder as family members exchanged glances. The years of favoritism and manipulation laid bare. Allison opened her mouth to counter, but the weight of the evidence was crushing. Her defenses crumbled under the unified voices of Mark, Rachel, and Linda, who now stood with me. I could feel the energy shift. The power that had always belonged to Allison was slipping away, replaced by a quiet but fierce authority radiating from my words and the truth they carried. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a reclamation. I ended with a steady gaze. "This ends now. I am done being controlled, done being silenced." The room held its breath, waiting, and in that charged silence, I tasted the first sweet sip of victory, like champagne bubbles rising and bursting, a promise of freedom finally within reach. The fallout was swift and merciless. Allison's empire, once so solid in its dominance, began to fracture in front of my eyes. Mark, who had once been indifferent, confronted her with a cold fury I hadn't seen before. "How could you lie to us?" he demanded, voice shaking with betrayal. Rachel, still fragile but awakening, withdrew her blind loyalty, leaving Allison increasingly isolated. The hospital board responded to the evidence I had provided with immediate action, reinstating me with full honors and launching an inquiry into Allison's interference. I felt a strange mixture of vindication and sorrow. How much damage had this woman wrought behind the scenes? Meanwhile, Allison's frantic attempts to regain control only hastened her downfall. She reached out to distant relatives, sending desperate messages laden with false apologies and promises of change. But the charm that once masked her manipulations was gone. The community's whispers grew louder, and doors that had once opened easily now closed firmly. Even her closest allies distanced themselves, wary of the storm she had unleashed. I watched from a distance, my resolve unshaken, as her web of influence unraveled thread by thread. David remained my unfailing anchor through the chaos, reminding me to keep my boundaries firm and my focus sharp. I refused to engage with Allison's manipulative overtures. I knew all too well that any response would only feed her desperation. Instead, I concentrated on healing the fractured relationships within my family, slowly rebuilding trust with Mark and Rachel, who were beginning to see the truth more clearly each day. The damage Allison had done was deep, but it was no longer hidden in darkness. As Allison's world crumbled, I felt an unexpected calm settle in my chest. The power had shifted, and with it came the chance for something new, a family no longer held hostage by fear and lies. The path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, I was free to walk it on my own terms. Allison's desperation turned venomous in the weeks that followed. When she realized that neither the family nor the hospital was bending to her will, she escalated her tactics in a last futile attempt to claw back control. I began receiving anonymous accusations and slanderous messages sent to colleagues, designed to undermine my professional reputation. Rumors circulated, meant to isolate me within the hospital's tight-knit circles, but I was prepared. My legal team swiftly intercepted each attack, neutralizing Allison's poison before it could take root. She enlisted old acquaintances, mutual friends, even distant relatives, flying monkeys who called Mark and Rachel, trying to sway them back to her side with twisted stories and guilt trips. Mark stood firm this time, his voice steady as he rejected Allison's manipulations. Rachel, slowly emerging from the fog of favoritism, stood by me as well. The family events that once felt like battlegrounds turned eerily quiet in Allison's absence. Invitations she once controlled were now extended without her knowledge, and her influence was a ghost at the table. I saw Allison's isolation deepen, the desperation in her eyes growing more frantic with every failed attempt. Her threats of legal action were empty. My team was ready, and my evidence airtight. Each card she played was met with calm, strategic resistance, exposing her further to the harsh light of truth. Watching her unravel was a grim satisfaction, tempered by the knowledge of the pain she had caused. But I would not let bitterness consume me. Instead, I held on to the quiet strength that had carried me through years of suffering. The last time Allison tried to reach out, it was with a broken voice and a plea for mercy. I listened once, and then refused to engage again. My boundaries were clear. Her final gambits had failed spectacularly, and in their failure, I found a profound sense of closure. The woman who had once held the family in her grip was now a solitary figure on the edge of her own undoing, while I stood firmly in the light of my own truth. The holiday gathering was small and peaceful, a stark contrast to those fraught with tension that I had endured for so long. David stood by my side, his hand warm in mine, and Linda, my unexpected ally, shared quiet smiles that spoke of solidarity and hope. The family was beginning to heal, tentative but real. Mark and Rachel were no longer pawns caught in Allison's game. They were people rediscovering their own voices and the possibility of trust. I looked around the room and felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a burden of years spent carrying invisible wounds and silent sacrifices. My professional life had been restored, my reputation rebuilt on the foundation of truth and perseverance. More importantly, I had reclaimed my dignity from the shadows of control and manipulation. Thanksgiving no longer feels like a battleground, I whispered softly, almost to myself. It's a new beginning. The scars remained, as they always would, but they were no longer shackles. They were reminders of my journey from invisibility to strength, from victim to architect of my own future. I was free, not just from Allison's toxic grasp, but from the fear that had once kept me silent. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to walk, guided by the quiet power I had always held within. In the soft glow of the evening, surrounded by those who now truly saw me, I found a peace I had never known. The future was no longer a shadowed battlefield, but a canvas waiting for the steady brush of hope and healing. I smiled, the weight of the past finally giving way to the promise of what could be. This was my story, my strength and my freedom.